everyone, welcome back to the Environmental Podcast. On this week's episode, we're talking about...
Minimalism!
Woo! I know everyone was missing the Science Saturdays, so we had to bring back that pattern of speech.
I don't think many people know what that is.
Indeed.
But hopefully people know what minimalism is. It's a very common topic, I would say, related to environmentalism online. I find that every time I see an environmental influencer, they're usually kind of minimalist as well.
Or at least they incorporate the aesthetics of minimalism, which is where the movement began, was in art.
Yeah. So today, through a discussion of different aspects of minimalism, either through history, through art, through contemporary examples, we are going to be trying to come up with a solid definition for it. Because there's a bunch of different definitions for minimalism, and some of them, depending on my mood, might be more cynical than others. Because it's easy to be cynical towards various movements like that. But I think a good place to start is minimalism in art, because we like to think of ourselves as pretty artistic. And minimalism in art is kind of very in vogue, I would say. When I say art, I mean popular art, which people recognize. The design language of the 2010s, for instance, in marketing. You look at Apple, you look at like Yeezy, fashion. Mm-hmm. Things tend to be very, let's strip away the non-essentials. You know, it was a lot of white, beige, black, neutral colors, and simple fonts, I would say, things like that. Mm. So when trying to define minimalism as some kind of antidote to the modern mind, that seems like a good place to start. Some other examples of minimalism in art, which I found, just thinking about it, not by looking it up or anything, were Hemingway, the author, because I recently read The Old Man and the Sea, and it was my first ever Hemingway, and it was so mind-blowing to me, because I've usually read historical fiction, which tends to have very flowery prose, or even poetry, which tends to be kind of steeped in metaphor. And The Old Man and the Sea, while itself being an allegory, the prose was just so simple. Mm-hmm. Like, it was just incredibly easy to follow. There were barely even any big words.
Yeah, Hemingway's philosophy is to say as much with as few words as possible, correct?
Yeah, that's kind of a good way of describing minimalism in art in every medium. And Le Corbusier, the architect, even though if you don't know the name, you know the building styles, which were very functional, I would say. Very simple, but beautiful. It's modernism, I guess, to an extreme.
Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of the prototype. The reason I mentioned him was that I think his buildings are a good early example of what I would call the typical sustainable designs, which tend to be, what would you say?
Sleek.
Yeah, sleek, simple.
Have a lot of glass and clean lines.
Yeah. You see this even on Instagram if you find some sustainable or environmental influencers. The pages tend to look very similar. And I think his buildings were a good example of that. The reason I think that minimalism in art is important is because people always say that life imitates art or art imitates life.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good example of that being a good thing. In art, that kind of ethos says that when you remove everything non-essential and you just make the canvas look as beautiful as it can with as few elements as it can, that's a more peaceful way of making art and also observing it. And I think that's a fair thesis to approach life with.
I believe so. It's very anti-affluence, anti-consumerism, because it's not selling you this idea of a life or a landscape which is really ornate and frilly. It's just the basics and making it look beautiful, which is what we talk about a lot in our own lives and just on the podcast, saying love the small things, find beauty in the small things.
In art, that's something like remove all the unnecessary elements so that all that remains is what's beautiful. And in life, I guess that's remove all the unnecessary objects or products so that all that remains is what's meaningful. A good quote that I have, I'm reading a book called The Japanese Sense of Beauty by Takashina Shuji, and apologies in advance because my pronunciation will be poor. I usually read this in my head, obviously. And it's a story which is well known in Japan. It really illustrates this point. So I'll just quote from the book. The renowned 16th century tea ceremony master Sen no Rikyu was another proponent of the aesthetics of omission. Rikyu's garden was known to be full of a rare and beautiful type of morning glory. When his lord Toyotomi Hideyoshi asked to see them, Rikyū invited Hideyoshi to visit him. The appointed morning was fine and sunny, but Hideyoshi arrived at Rikyū's residence to find the garden bare. The morning glories had all been plucked. Hideyoshi was furious, but when Rikyū ushered him into the tea ceremony room, he became transfixed by the decoration Rikyū had prepared for the alcove, a single morning glory blossom. Hideyoshi returned home entirely satisfied. The Japanese aesthetic consciousness has an undeniable soft spot for the gorgeous and ornamental, but as this tale shows, the ideal is not to simply revel in abundance. Rather, such effects are deployed with a simplifying element of restraint, excising whatever is unnecessary. And the book also has a bunch of other examples about how in Japan versus in the West, the way they paint landscapes is different, tending to omit unnecessary elements and just kind of leave whatever is the focus of the landscape, be it like a bunch of irises or a river or something like that. So I think there's definitely cultural differences, and we'll get into that probably later when we talk about the roots of minimalism and even the appropriation, I would say, from modern, usually Western YouTubers, let's say, from like Buddhism or Japanese culture or things like that. What do you think to that quote?
You told me that story a little bit ago, and it's been on my mind ever since. Often when I find something that I love, a part of me wants a bunch of it.
Yeah, you want to have as much of it as you can, right?
Yeah.
I feel that too.
Especially if it's food. If you have one nice slice of cake, it's hard to just appreciate it. You just want more. Or even afterwards, you're thinking about it, but not in a sense of admiration. You're thinking about it in a sense of want, like you want more of it.
Food's such a cool example for this.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't talk much about food in my discussion that I've prepared for today.
Neither did I.
That'd be a good
it's interesting.
spin-off, maybe. Because I feel like our diets are the opposite of minimalist.
Yeah, definitely.
Really powerful story.
Thank you.
And if anybody takes anything away from this episode, it'll be that, in remembering to appreciate something for its beauty, not for its quantity.
Yeah. Well put.
We also talk about it when we talk about bookstores and stores, how you like to walk into a bookstore because there's so many of them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you walked into a room and there was just one really nice book, you'd super appreciate that book.
Well, I've been thinking about this more and more every time I go into stores, about how the products are displayed. I remember hearing Kanye talk about that, and he even talks about like reimagining the idea of a closet.
Okay.
And that's something as into, it's like, well, should things be in boxes or should they be out? I think that's an interesting idea with clothing stores, but also I work in a garden center, and almost literally every single inch of the store is covered with product.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, from a business standpoint, it makes sense because it's like people need to see what they can buy. But maybe there's some kind of artistic reason to not do that. I don't know, it's hard to say.
Yeah, people could come in instead with an intention to purchase something, and then they would need to ask for that selection of wind chimes or pots, instead of being presented with every single object that they could possibly ever buy, having to get to the pot section, there being like 47 of them, and then having to choose the one they want.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like the Apple Store.
Yes.
That's, I think most people would say that's minimalist. Most high-end stores tend to be like that. We're getting into a little bit the fact that they are trying to also create a sense of luxury by, limiting the supply that's visible.
Yeah.
That makes sense as well. But also, to go to the complete end of the price spectrum, you often go to thrift stores. I've recently been going to them as well, and there are some that have price tags on every single piece of clothing, and there are some which have literally just a list on the wall, which is like men's sweaters, $6.
Yeah.
Men's pants, $5 or whatever.
It's the more minimalist approach.
Yeah, I saw that and I was like, that's cool. I don't know what makes that so cool. I guess because it's economical when it comes to materials, because you're not having to make tags, and also time, because you're not having to tag everything. Yeah, there's definitely different ways of doing things which we might find kind of completely fundamental or like foundational.
For granted.
Yeah.
But we can do them differently. Do them in a more minimalist manner.
We can.
What I wanted to talk about next, if you're all right to move on, was mental versus physical minimalism.
Okay.
Because this isn't something I discovered until a year or two into learning about minimalism as a theory or a way of life. And I found it to connect all the dots or all the questions I had about minimalism, because everybody knows, or maybe they don't know, when your room is messy, it's a reflection of your mental state almost always. Whenever I've been really stressed or been going through a hard time, it's not a conscious choice to spend less time cleaning up or dusting, but it just manifests itself as a dirty room or a dirty house. And it's also a bit of a negative feedback loop. So when your room is messy, say you've just kind of made the choice to let it get like that and get cluttered.
Or you just neglected it, I think is a better word.
Yeah, then your brain
It's
gets
also
really messy. Yeah. So when we are approaching minimalism as a way of freeing up space for the things that you care about in your life, be it your passions, be it people, time to spend with family, you know, like all those things, we need to also clean up our mental headspace.
Yeah.
So that could be getting rid of relationships that are harmful to you. Cleaning up digital minimalism is also interesting. That's kind of the biggest thing that I find is cluttered.
Is that when you empty your inbox?
Empty your inbox, put your photos into files, or just delete the ones you don't want. I always have like 1,000 screenshots in my phone, and then I go through and I'm like, I know I screenshotted this for a purpose, but then I never went back and deleted it. Having all your spaces clean, be it mental, digital, or physical.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is what minimalism proposes, is by owning fewer things.
Yeah. I think for me it's literally about, maybe we should start with saying what our thoughts on minimalism are. Like what our history on it is. I was always very, as I mentioned, cynical towards the term itself, minimalism. And I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but it always just seemed very performative to me. I would always reject the idea of having to claim it as an identity.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I don't want to be, like, I'm not, or kind of prescribe to it as a way of life.
Yeah.
But I think naturally I just had few things because I don't like accumulating things for all the reasons. I don't like mess. It makes my mind very cluttered.
You really value negative space.
Yeah, I guess. I like space. I like space to move around. I often don't like bumping around in kitchens with multiple people. Things like that.
Sometimes I think he's going to minimize me from the kitchen.
Don't say that. That's so mean. What are your thoughts on minimalism?
I really admire it. And I wish it wasn't such a cult, a capital M, I'm a minimalist. But I don't know what else it could be than this group of people who you can take inspiration from. I suppose you could take inspiration from the art rather than the people who are minimalists.
Yeah, or it could be, as it once was, more of a outwardly religious thing. And outwardly, I know people say there's like a spiritual aspect to it.
Yeah.
But that's often kind of hidden behind a bunch of self-help hooey, I find.
Yeah, that's a good point. Looking to the tradition that is minimalism rather than the YouTube version of it.
Yeah.
But I really like it. I'm trying to implement more of it into my life on a daily basis by decluttering, Marie Kondoing my room, you know. I'm looking forward to someday when we have a house to make it kind of minimalist.
Okay.
But we would never do it like intentionally, and then people would come over and be like, oh wow, your place is so clean. And we'd be like, yeah, we're minimalists, you should try it too.
I think we both just, okay, I think here's an element of it. I don't want to speak for you, but I'm kind of cheap, so I don't like just buying stuff.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, as I mentioned, I don't like having things in the way. I mean, physically. I like what you said. It's about clearing the path to pursue, be it your relationships or your passions. Because it's literally, I find that things are often in the way.
If you want to go out with friends, but then you're like, shoot, my kitchen's really messy, I have to clean that up. So that cuts into the time you're going to spend with them.
Or even just, oh, I have to walk over these shoes.
Yeah, and then it gets you slightly irritated.
Yeah, exactly.
It super impacts your mood, and then just the sheer time it takes. Even if you're a super neat person, you still have to like take your 30 pairs of shoes out of the closet every month to wipe down the shelf, you know?
Yeah,
like,
I suppose.
It will always take more time if you have more things. And then the choice associated with it. I've been talking a lot about decision fatigue to my professors whenever they're like asking for input on classes. I say people right now have to make like a million choices a day about if they should go out, if they should wear a mask, you know, all that stuff. And it's just, no matter, how clean you are, like neat you are, how good your mental health is, you still have to make a decision every morning. Which shoes am I going to wear? What am I going to eat for breakfast? Which dish am I going to take with me for lunch, you know? Just the decisions.
And especially, I have to say, if you want to live environmentally, if you want to live zero waste, you have to make way more decisions. Like your mind will be more cluttered.
Yes.
Because you have to think, okay, I'm going to the store. Let's say I want to buy some meat. I have to bring some Tupperware.
Yeah.
Whereas before it's like, if you're not trying to reduce waste or anything. You just go to the store and buy what's on the shelves.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes the more difficult choices will clutter your mind. So I'd say it's more important that you clear your mind of the things which aren't necessities, which don't have to be there, which is what minimalism, I mean, that's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, this idea of mental versus physical minimalism is probably the idea of the whole episode.
Yes.
Because if you guys can't already tell, we're not going to be talking much about practices of physical minimalism or like alternatives to single-use stuff or whatever. One note that I had, I'll just read it word for word, was, I think minimalism can kind of be described as control of your possessions and thoughts. I don't want to learn things unintentionally. When I say learn things unintentionally, it means I don't want things like bumping around in my mind that I didn't deliberately put there. An example I had was song lyrics from the radio.
Yeah.
I mentioned that to you the other month when we were talking about how in classical education, memorizing and learning poetry was kind of prized.
Yes.
And now it's that we don't do that. But we said, well, to give some credit to modern people, most people know like 100 songs word for word. And then we had the observation that a lot of those songs we didn't learn on purpose. We were just kind of subjected to them on the radio. So that was an example I had. And also advertisements is a big one. That's just imagery and words and music, which is just shoved in our faces and you can't turn off to it as much as we'd like to. Gossip in terms of your relationships with other people. There might be information which you don't want. And I think that we are all very sensitive to this stuff without being aware of that all the time. And it's ultimately all distracting, emotionally and intellectually.
Yes. To speak on advertisements, before I started preparing for this episode, I never thought of them as a anti-minimalist thing.
Yeah.
But then I realized they are the anti-minimalist thing.
Yeah, they're all over the place.
Because both of us have this ad blocker on our computers, which is very good. You go on YouTube, you don't get any ads. There's never any. So I'm not used to that. But then my computer reset and I didn't have this browser anymore. And then I started getting advertisements for everything. And then I literally immediately started shopping more.
Really?
And I know it's like a weird thing to say because I'm not the most shoppy. I'm a shoppy person, but not an online shoppy person. And I just was like, why am I doing this? And then I realized it was because I was being subjected to these ads.
Yeah, but also imagine if you lived in a city, so there were actual shops near you and billboards and things like that.
Yeah.
And imagine if instead of streaming services like Netflix, you had to watch TV.
Yeah.
It's like there's so many ads. I thought that watching sports.
Yeah.
I had this comparison. I started watching the NBA about a year and a half ago when all my life pretty much the only sport I'd watched was soccer, which is super rare in that it's 45 minutes of uninterrupted programming.
Yeah.
Like there's no ads breaking everything up. There's just a halftime break.
Yeah.
And then I started watching basketball and I was like, whoa.
It's exhausting.
It's incredibly fast paced and not just the sport, but the ads. They were sponsoring free throws in the NBA finals. It was like this, it said, it's like, these are the Google Home free throws. And I was like, what?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I don't know what my point there is.
It just feeds back into the decision fatigue thing.
Yeah.
That even if you're super resilient to advertisements and you never shop, you still have to make that decision every time you see one. So minimalizing that clutter in your life, be it getting off Facebook or Instagram, be it having a really good ad blocker, not getting the news or watching your TV with ads. You have to think about these kind of unrelated things if you want to implement minimalism into your life.
The conclusion of my thought on this is that I think the intrusion of such things into my life in particular is such that I noticed it the other day, even when I'm just having quiet time, even when I'm just going for a walk or just trying to chill and not actively do anything, or meditate, I guess is a word. I almost always just have a constant stream of images, sounds flickering through my mind from recent events.
Stimuli.
Yeah, recent stimuli.
Yes.
And I'm sure I'm not alone in that.
Yeah.
And that's just hurts so horrible. I think that feeling, hopefully people can relate to that, is the thing which minimalism tries to erase.
While still on the topic of mental minimalism, just want to suggest people take up meditation. And
I wanted to talk about that.
I heard a fantastic recommendation for how to meditate.
Okay.
Because there's like a million different ways to do so. There's meditating on a verse or a passage from
or praying.
Praying, yes. And then there's like mantra meditation, which would be saying, I am worthy or I am successful, and then like meditating on that, just going over and over it for a set period of time. But then I heard this other one, which I don't know what the name would be for it, but Sam Harris, I think. I don't know who he is, but I heard his name.
No, he's a big proponent of meditation.
Yeah, but he does this type of meditation where you just let your mind run for a set period of time.
Yeah, I've heard about that as well.
And I was like, I didn't hear of that. And I was like, that's so good. Because when do we ever let ourselves?
I know. Because when you're meditating, you're kind of constantly slapping yourself on the wrist every time you think of something random. You're like, no, think of Zen, be Zen or whatever.
Yeah.
But I love that suggestion too, because it was basically, no, when those thoughts come, follow them, follow them to their extremes, and eventually you'll get kind of lost and you'll reach a kind of Zen state, but you'll just kind of come from it the other way around.
Yeah. Or like you might just come up with your really good idea.
Oh yeah, it's creative as well.
Yeah. I went on a not 4 hour walk, but a really long walk today. And I wouldn't let myself run with ideas. I was like, no, you need to think about this, this, and this. But I was like, I could have used that time to come up with like the solution to something,
Yeah, no, for sure.
So I think I'm going to try that.
Walking helps as well.
Yeah, for people who struggle with meditation, just like relaxing your mind, try this out.
I do think that's something that's relevant. Meditation doesn't have to look like our image of meditation. You don't have to be sitting like cross-legged. I don't think so anyway. Like I'm not, as I already said, I'm not like a calm person. So maybe I'm not the best person to take advice from this. But I do think that meditation looks different for different people. I don't think you have to be sitting with your hands on your knees. I think you can be walking. I think you can be running. I think you can be exercising, reading, anything.
It's taking the time to, it's just taking time.
Something about awareness, something about mindfulness.
Yeah.
David Lynch is also a big proponent for meditation as a creative spring, I guess.
Yeah.
Transcendental meditation is his thinking on a mantra, but it's also kind of about chasing thoughts. Yeah, I think we don't have to relay the science on that because it's super well known. Meditation is really good for you.
Yeah. And that's the best way to become a mental minimalist.
Yeah, probably. I don't know, maybe. A question that I had was very related. What systems of culture/society are fundamentally opposed to minimalism? We already mentioned advertising. I talked about it in relation to the NBA as well as billboards. One that I thought of was education.
Okay.
Because we've both been pretty, I won't say upset, but frustrated with our course load right now as undergraduate students. One of the reasons for me is that the courses are also wildly different.
Yeah.
So that my mind's just pushing several different ways every day.
Yes.
I know university students like to say that it's a really bad time, but I even sympathize with high school students more because I think they get more homework and I think their classes are more varied. If you have math, English, science, all giving you an hour of homework every day, I think you're not going to be producing well in any of those avenues.
Or retaining anything from any of them. I had that revelation last year that we're in 5 classes a semester. And I was so excited to take every single one of those classes because they were all on topics I was so passionate about. One of them was it was something like international rural development. So it was talking about like development in rural areas. I completely forgot I took it. That's how little brain space I allowed for it because it was an easy class. So I had to just pass it. And then I was reviewing my transcript recently and I was like, I didn't remember I took that and that was last semester.
Yeah, that's very sad.
It sucks. It's
but
like
I feel
paid
that too.
$1,000 for this. It's just too cluttered.
Yeah.
It doesn't allow for any kind of growth.
We don't realize it at the time.
Yeah.
When we're choosing the courses, it's tough to predict what it's going to be like. Now I think I have a better grasp of it than I did when I first started undergrad.
Yeah.
But now I'm finishing, so I don't have to select any more courses.
Yeah.
For education, the 2 points I had were the different subjects and also the multiple ways in which each subject is taught. So when we talk about our mind being scattered, it's like for this one course I have right now, there's a textbook, an online textbook, separate online readings, YouTube videos, recorded slideshows, quizzes, tests, assignments, practice questions. That's too much, I think.
I think so.
And especially the different, I know this is opposed to teaching wisdom, which is that you want to teach in such a variety of ways that every student will get caught and that it will activate people's brains in different ways. But for me, I find it does the opposite. I think it makes me shut down when there's too much to try and keep track of. It's also definitely a fact that we're not on campus, so there isn't that kind of physical grounding for any of it.
I think an interesting approach to teaching would be emphasizing note-taking. Just saying, come to class, take your notes, maybe like submit your notes at the end of the year.
Ooh.
That's an interesting.
Your notes are the
idea.
assignment.
Yeah. And then maybe there's a final exam.
Yeah,
or a project.
And when we say the notes are the assignment, something like, okay, we're getting into education a little bit too much here, but the notes aren't just write down what I say. It's I'll ask the questions, write down what you think, something like that. Yeah.
That's good.
There are cooler ways to run classes, definitely.
Yeah.
I think it's so obsessed with quantifying how much you retain sometimes that it becomes too easy for students to just game it and not use any imagination or active learning. Oh, another point I had on advertising was not just the actual images and sounds they bombard us with, but the products themselves. It's so hard to find products, especially good ones, which don't have logos on.
True.
Logos or brand names. And it's like everything in this room right now that we're in has some little picture or word on it, which is in reference to something else.
True.
And I always say when I'm thinking about rooms that I don't like having pictures on the walls because we have enough images outside our own homes that we're subject to that sometimes your eyes just want some peace, I think. And products are another example of that.
Yeah.
And I think it's telling that typically the point is that, okay, there's like mid-range price products which have logos, but then the more higher end you go and the more luxury you go, the less conspicuous the logo tends to get, at least typically or classically. I think that says a lot. So sometimes you're paying for that extra peace of mind.
True.
Which is interesting.
One thing that minimalism emphasizes is quality over quantity, for sure. The online minimalists that I reference, almost all of them came from a place of either affluence or poverty. Like they were in a state where they either didn't have any money and they used minimalism to save money and make money, and then some people who had so much money that they felt this gap in their life that could only be filled by not having all of these car payments and house to heat and bills to pay.
Yeah.
So they minimized and then we're able to spend time on the things that mattered. So that's just a side note because I feel like that's the most commonly known part of minimalism. I don't want to dwell on it for too long.
The financial aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you want to hear about that, just go on YouTube or the internet.
And just type in minimalism. So could you think of any other systems that you think create this muddlement?
Something about relationships. And I don't know exactly what I mean, but I feel like there's a bit of a pressure to
have a big social cycle?
Yeah.
Do you mean like in the West? You mean specifically? Because I know different countries do it differently. And that's something that's always been the most interesting to me about learning about different cultures and traveling, which is that, hey, over there, I won't feel pressured to have any friends.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
And I think friends are important, but they can be like the source of your peer pressure or your desire to spend or consume, because shopping's such a social activity, eating out.
Well, I would even say that friends are important, but acquaintances not so much.
Yeah, they can take up the mental space that you need to give towards your good friends.
That sounds so introverted.
This is very introverted. I don't want to say it in like a negative way, but I just mean be aware of the influence the people around you have on your mental health, I suppose.
One that I came up with undeniably was the internet.
Oh, yeah.
It's like almost the literal opposite of minimalism.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a little bit recently about website design and how lo-fi can you go. That's why we for most of our graphic design, or for a lot of it, we use a font called source code, which is literally just the source code font for websites.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I really think there's such a benefit to just not thinking about stuff.
Yeah.
Like not having so many adornments. On the internet, design usually is just very maximalist and a complete clash of different tones, styles, colors, even sometimes on the exact same page when you just scroll down. And just the nature of the internet itself compared to a library is that there's always so many possibilities, which people typically proclaim as a good thing, but I tend to think it adds to the muddlement.
I agree. Usually you have a tab open for music, tab open for the assignment reference, the references, the document.
Exactly.
Then you have a random tab open with like something unrelated,
with
like the NBA.
Online chess or something.
It's just
something like that.
Your messenger, you don't even think about it. You're like, I'm working on my assignment right now, but you have like 8 different tabs open.
And phones as well.
And then your phone's sitting there with...
I know you can turn off notifications, but no one does.
Yeah.
There's just such a space for software design to improve, to be the cure, to be the medicine.
Yes.
What can I say?
Or just going to the library to do your work with the physical books and notepads.
Boo. Did you want to move on?
Sure. I'm going to move on to the 2 types of minimalists I've identified.
Okay.
So we have, as I already mentioned, the financially driven, motivated minimalists. They don't end up being, it's not like their entire experience as within this realm of being stays financially driven, but they kind of come from that place.
Okay.
And they seem to be very focused on productivity,
efficiency,
using minimalism as a tool to get ahead in your career, in your art, what have you. The second type that I found was more about finding your true self, or kind of environmentalism.
The spiritual minimalists.
The spiritual minimalists, yes.
Okay.
And minimalism is a huge internet subculture, I'll say.
Yep.
And the 2 financial minimalists that I had as examples were Matt D'Avella and then The Minimalists. The Minimalists have this podcast. They have 200 episodes or so. They have books. They do speeches. Just these 2 guys. They're all right. I don't want to... If you're into the productivity side, I'd recommend them. They take calls from people, answer people's questions. Matt D'Avella is very productivity, procrastination.
He's a YouTube guy.
Where
would Marie Kondo fit?
She'd be more of the spiritual minimalist.
Yeah, okay.
Because she does it for health, environment. I like Marie.
It's very holistic. I've never watched any of it either, but I agree with everything I've heard about it.
Yeah, I watched an entire series of that once in French.
En français.
En français, to try and learn, so I can have a whole conversation on minimalism in French. That's the only topic. Anyway.
Do it right now.
No.
Why? Because you don't have a conversation partner? Because I only know a few words in French.
Possible. Okay, and then the spiritual minimalists. I don't have like the biggest ones because I don't know too many of the big ones. Oh, Marie Kondo. Yes, she'd be the leader of this group. The other 2 that I really like and will recommend to anyone interested in minimalism would be a small wardrobe, who, from her name, obviously sounds like a small fashion blogger, but she doesn't focus on fashion too much. She focuses on journaling, mindfulness, connecting with nature. Very cool. Then the other one is The Mustards, which again is a podcast, and they're just kind of cool. They're vegans. They talk about being you and stuff, and they're neat.
Talk about being you and stuff. They sound cool.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting angle to take from minimalism, because sometimes it can seem very soulless.
No, I like that.
If I'm becoming a minimalist, I have to, what do you say, like give up all my worldly positions.
To discover who I really am. We're shedding all the costumes.
Yes.
We're taking the mask off.
Yes.
We're selling the mask.
I'm only going to wear white, black,
yeah, that's a little bit informative, I will say.
Yes, but that's what I'm saying is like you don't have to do. You can shed the mask, but then wear your sparkles, wear your oversized jumper, whatever.
The way I would be, that all sounds very good.
Yes.
The way I would be critical of modern, as we call it, capital M minimalism, is that I find it often makes minimalism itself the goal, meaning that it makes...
being the most minimal.
Yeah, it makes getting rid of your objects the goal rather than the means to an end, or the end rather than the means to an end. And so the way I like to think of it is that it doesn't really destroy that kind of consumerist materialism, which we can all agree is bad.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of just replaces it.
I think so.
And an example of this I had in myself is that I kind of take pride in the fact that I get as much joy from getting rid of something as I do from attaining something new.
Yes.
But that's not really a good or bad thing. I think it means that I'm still putting
a lot of value on the objects.
Exactly, a lot of value on the material world. So I think that's something that minimalism, capital M minimalism online tends to encourage.
Yeah. And maybe the people themselves don't encourage that in their own lives, but it's just how it's interpreted. When you speak to someone about minimalism, they say, oh yeah, I've done the challenge, I've gotten rid of all my things. But then either A, they're going to like relapse and start consuming again.
Or B, they'll just think that that's
that.
That's that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, cool, okay, I fixed it.
Yeah.
Or I helped the world or whatever. And I think that there is kind of a selfish side of this. I feel that in myself anyway. I can only kind of speak on myself. So that's modern minimalism, right? Mm-hmm. Did you have any other observations on that?
That was all I just wanted to mention.
I think it's so cool to contrast that against what I would call ancient minimalism, or like the roots of it, which, doing some research, you can find it in just about every culture.
Yeah.
Every culture has the story of like the wise old sage who lives with nothing, but
Yeah.
is the most peaceful person.
Yeah, and like every leader within many of the world religions seem to be minimalists. Like, I had quotes from all of Prophet Muhammad, Jesus, Gandhi, everyone,
Yeah.
Confucius, just saying like things are not what it's about.
Yeah, whether you go from ancient China, ancient Greece, Middle East, there's, as we said, there's tons of examples of people renouncing their worldly possessions. And the Jesus quote is that he said it's hard for a rich person to get to heaven, right? I'm paraphrasing, obviously.
Yes, he
Something
said,
about threading the camel.
yeah, camel through the eye of the needle.
Yes. And that, I think that meant it's not like that you can't be rich, but it's that you should have given it all away, right? Something like that.
Yeah, it's like you just shouldn't put value on worldly things. You need to value humility, wisdom, charity. I was reading about minimalism within religion, and I made a list of basically the goals, or a little summary.
Okay.
So these are the things that you should focus on instead of worldly things: contentment, passion, wisdom, charity. And then one point I had was desire is the main cause of unhappiness. And then humility.
Desire is the main cause of unhappiness.
Yes.
That's like the Stoic perspective, right? Which is that it's cool
Want not.
Want not. It's cool to strive, but when you put all your hopes on attaining one thing, then if you attain it, your hopes will just jump to the next thing, so you'll never really be happy or
Yes.
fulfilled, I guess is the word for it. So they kind of looked the other way, and they use negative visualization, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, instead of visualizing, okay, I really, really want that job and then I'll be happy, they thought about, what if I lose my job? That would make me really unhappy.
Yeah.
And then if they kept their job, they'd be happy.
Yeah.
Or like more at peace, I guess is the word for it.
More about attaining peace than attaining
Material
other
success.
things. Yeah. I wrote down minimalism is basically a cult, because
Ooh,
I don't mean it in like a negative way, because we both appreciate minimalism.
it's a good cult.
But I feel like minimalists are very evangelical in how they speak about it.
Oh.
And they try and recruit people into this circle of come with us, come meditate, come renounce your worldly belongings. But I don't know, just like kind of avoid that maybe. Don't identify with it, because we're living in a time where people don't have an identity, because even countries aren't really distinct anymore.
Yeah.
Not many people are identify with a religion anymore, or they might, but it's not, they don't identify with it, you know what I mean?
That's kind of what I was saying earlier about making minimalism the goal.
Yeah.
It's like, it shouldn't be your identity as a minimalist.
Yeah.
It should just be your means to, I don't know, clearing your mind or whatever, or finding out your real identity.
Yeah.
As you said, finding yourself.
Yeah.
As the Mustards say. I had a good quote on the contrast between modern and ancient minimalism.
Okay.
It kind of references, I think it's a Christian author, it references that tradition of going into the desert to, purge yourself of worldly temptations in a kind of asceticism.
Okay.
So it's from a book called Where God Happens, and it says, "We have to be careful about modernizing the desert tradition in a shallow way. It sounds wonderful when we are told that the path of silence and asceticism is all about self-discovery, because we are most of us deeply in love with the idea of self-expression, and discovering the true self so as to express it more fully. That is the burden of hundreds of self-help books. But for the desert fathers and mothers, the quest for truth can be frightening, and they know how many strategies we devise to keep ourselves away from the real thing." I think the truth is in that final line, how many strategies we devise to keep ourselves away from the real thing. Because it's kind of like minimalism, a lot of like self-help books about meditation, yoga, whatever it may be, are all strategies we devise to keep ourselves away from real truths, I find, real quote-unquote enlightenment.
Yeah.
Not that I know enough to speak about that. And it reminds me of a book I read called Siddhartha in high school.
Okay.
It was about Siddhartha Gautama, who I believe was the original Buddha, and his quest for enlightenment. Basically, the story goes that he was the son of a religious teacher, a really well-respected one in the village, and he was raised in that tradition. He was going to take over, but then basically he ran away. He was like, no, this isn't the life for me. He thought that that was all very kind of ceremonial and ritual and didn't really do much for personal enlightenment. So he went into the woods or the jungle, more apt, where the ascetics were, and they all had no possessions. They were pretty much naked. They ate like nothing, and they just meditated all day. So kind of like a monastery, kind of like monks, but out in the wild. And he lived there for years, and then he had some kind of spiritual progress, but he was like, no, this isn't it either.
Mm-hmm.
So then he went the exact opposite, and he went into basically, I guess, the old school Indian equivalent of Las Vegas.
Okay.
Went to a town like that, became like a really big gambler, had a relationship with a courtesan, lived like that, like a hedonist for a couple of years, said this isn't the place for me either. And then the solution in that book, the Enlightenment, was like the middle path. It was like, you don't need to forsake all your possessions for the sake of it. You don't need to strive and gamble and live a material life for the sake of that either.
Mm-hmm.
You take the middle path, which is kind of, I guess, transcending even the concern about material objects.
Mm-hmm.
And he just lived by a river.
I think that's the answer.
Yeah, that's the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
it's just material things just aren't good for you.
Material things having a like a big place in your mind is not good for you.
Yeah, because they're the biggest barrier between your spiritual self and your physical self, I think, are the things that are kind of blocking you.
The things.
Yeah. Anywho,
let's get back to
what
talking.
else did I want to say about minimalism? Environmentalism and minimalism.
Yeah, good topic.
This is one of my final topics because it's one of the biggest drivers for people being interested in minimalism, because they say, okay, consumerism's bad. I have all these things, but they're kind of in between me and being an environmentalist, just because you still have a bunch of stuff, and therefore that's occupying your thoughts instead of thinking about shopping ethically, getting your groceries in a good way, cooking in a sustainable way. Like, it just takes up too much time.
Yes.
And it just seems like it's the best way forward as a way of thinking if we want society to be more sustainable, because people need to be satisfied with less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is basically criticizing the Western footprint in terms of we each have 20 pairs of pants. You mean?
Yes.
Criticizing it from an environmental perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
So even if somebody is deciding to make the switch to minimalism in the name of the environment, from the outside you might say, this is silly, they're getting rid of their things. Like, they're wasting these things. Even if they're recycling or giving them away.
Okay.
Saying, aren't they thankful? But I think the thinking behind becoming a minimalist in the name of the environment would be to set an example for how you can be happy.
Definitely.
It's more about, like, being a good example.
It is.
That's really all I had to say.
So can we try and conclude and come up with a definition for what is good minimalism, or do you think we've already done it?
We've kind of done it. I had a slight conclusion.
Okay.
So, how to incorporate minimalism into your life in a healthy way.
Okay.
We're going to say digitally, clean things out that no longer serve you.
Delete all your apps like Alicia did on her phone because she had no storage.
Yes. Pretend like you have no storage if you do in fact have storage. One thing I didn't mention earlier was, you know when you hold on to, like, the paints or the knitting or the golf set? Like, things that you bought or were gifted and you really wanted to take up golf.
Okay.
Or you really wanted to take up painting, and you keep them around for one day when you do take that up because you don't want to waste them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want... It's like the what-if items.
Yes, okay.
Get rid of them. Give
Really?
them to give them to someone who they will serve better than you.
Immediately.
Because I've tried this, it will free up so much space in your brain.
Because now you don't have to think that eventually you'll go surfing. You mean something like that?
Exactly. Because every time you have free time, you think, oh, I should be painting. I should be making plans to go golfing. You think these things, and you never do them. But instead of allowing that free time to be spent on things you care about.
Free.
Yeah.
I like that word, freedom.
Yes.
Because what you just said about free time, it's like, okay, if you have all these things, then just their physical presence forces you to do them, or at least consider them.
Yeah.
And if you remove them all, then, and just ask yourself truly, what do I want to do? You know, what do I enjoy? Then I think you'll probably get a more honest answer. Even if you don't then own the thing, then you can go buy it.
Exactly. And it's like, don't keep something around just because you want to someday try it. Either try it now or, like, give it to someone who it will serve better. Who could then, if someday you have the urge, go to them.
Right. It's kind of a minor example of hoarding, I would say. Yes.
And it's really important to focus on functionality. So don't have a wardrobe which is all hiking gear, but you never hike. Because one, that portion of your wardrobe you'll never wear if you are going to dance class every day instead of hiking. Freeing up the space for the things you actually do. You have to be really honest with yourself. Don't have your like aesthetic wardrobe, have your like practical wardrobe.
I can tell you're talking to yourself.
Of course.
Because you have so many formal clothes.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Because I want to be a princess, but I'm not.
But you never get to go to any balls.
We'll see about that. No, but that's exactly, I'm talking to myself.
I know.
Yeah. What else? Try a no buy.
No buy.
Yeah. So go, like, set a time period for yourself. Say it's a week. Say I'm not going to buy anything. That includes food. So depending on what
Fasting for a whole week, wow.
But the thing is, there's probably so many cans of lentils and bagged rice. Just eat that. You know? Don't spend your time thinking about shopping for a week. If you have like a really minimalist pantry already, obviously spend money on food, but no buying takeout or new shoes, whatever. Always gonna emphasize swapping or giving your things to your friends, because that's less wasteful and it's a little bit, it's not fully minimalist, but it's economical, we'll say. Anyway, those are just little things I wanted to mention.
Very cool. I'm sure, or I hope rather, the discussion as well raised some ideas in people's minds about, hey, that makes me think maybe I should do this, or maybe I should not do this.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of hope that's the goal for this whole podcast.
Yes.
Because I know that every episode, that's what I hope to get out of it.
Yeah.
It's like I hope from this discussion I'll get something new, or I'll learn something new,
mm-hmm.
or this will change a little bit about the way I live for the next week.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I do hope people enjoyed that or found it.
Got something out of it?
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
You know, hopefully inspired some kind of thought or made you think about something in a new way.
Yes.
And on that note, thanks for listening. You can find us on Instagram at @the_environmental if you want more behind the scenes content on just our thoughts about pretty much everything.
Yep. Also, feel free to give us a rating if you're on Apple Podcasts, or a thumbs up. I don't know what all the other platforms do, but help us grow, because we're really excited about this podcast, and this was our 52nd episode.
Whole year in the books.
Heyo, let's go. Thanks for listening, everybody.
See ya.